This is Paul Glumaz, and today is the 26th of February, 2020. And this is being brought to you by the General Welfare Presents. Alright, so now we're coming into reality time. Folks, this is serious. And we are now entering the breakdown crisis, globally and strategically and in the U.S. A breakdown crisis. And what I mean by a breakdown crisis is the following. LaRouche has been forecasting for now over almost 50 years that the economic policies and the policy orientation of the expanding, developing British imperial system, otherwise known as the rules-based order, otherwise known as globalization, otherwise known as the right to protect R2P, the right to end the sovereignty of nations, otherwise known as the global banking casino, financial casino, otherwise known as the current system of too big to fail, too big to jail. All of that is designed and vectored in one direction, and that is, at some point in time, it's going to break down. Because it doesn't sustain, it's not there for the general welfare, it's not there to sustain human development, it's not there to help any nation develop, it's not there for any other reason than to increase the influence and power of an elite, of an oligarchical elite, and subject the population to greater and greater depredations, greater and greater loss of sovereignty, greater power concentrated in the financial system, until the whole thing can't be sustained any longer, and then it blows. Now, there's a number of dimensions in this. There's the financial dimension. There's also, how do you sustain a situation where you can't get nations to assert their sovereignty and cooperate with each other? Is through having the world divided into warring camps. So the permanent war is a component of this. Of course, that always threatens to spill over into a full war, a full nuclear war. But that's always been there. That's been there from the time the U.S. dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and then been there since the Cold War. That's been that reality, that at any one time when things get out of control, you have a nuclear war. And so, but it's that tension, that control is part of the system. It's part of the system. And the whole process of globalization, the whole idea of globalization is that no nation should be allowed to have a complete set economy. No nation should be allowed to be able to grow all of its own food, but it has to import food from somewhere else, and it has to export food to somewhere else. So, and to have a just-in-time system such that not all nations are vulnerable in one form or another to having a particular part of their supply chain cut off. And then that's when you can threaten to sanction a nation like Iran or Syria or Russia, or China, or whoever. So the idea is that we want to be able to blackmail, you want to be able to sanction. Or you have everyone integrated into the same payment system. In this case, it's the SWIFT payment system, and then you threaten to cut them out of the SWIFT payment system, and you collapse them as a threat. Countries which have been self-sufficient in food, like Egypt and Mexico, are now have to import most of their food that they consume, and yet in the case of Mexico, they export all the vegetables, to the U.S. that they grow under very cheap farm labor. So this is the kind of system. It's the free trade system. It's the World Trade Organization system. It's all of that. But the ultimate consequences of this is you turn the more industrialized nations into primarily consumer economies. You turn the poorer nations into primarily producer nations without the means to develop. Now, one of those nations that was turned into that, one poorer nation that was turned into, one big poorer nation that was turned into this has escaped. And it's called China. That's what China has done. It has escaped that system. And they're building the Belt and Road, and they're creating another system. So the effort is to destroy China and to destroy Russia if Russia does not join the West in going after China. So that's the game. That's what Pompeo was about. That's what Bolton was about. That's what the entire U.S. intelligence community is about. The entire U.S. military-industrial complex is about. The entire situation. Now, within that structure is the domestic enforcement agency for the empire. So each place has a domestic enforcement agency. In the case of the U.S., it's the FBI, which has been built up by the British orientation, has had an increasingly British orientation since its initial origins in the Teddy Roosevelt administration. It has always functioned that way, increasingly. So you have the Justice Department is the enforcement arm. Any politician in the U.S., any significant figure like LaRouche or anyone else that comes along and threatens to demand a change of that system, to go back or to reestablish a fundamental sovereign orientation and defense of the population, is targeted by this system. And Trump has been extremely targeted, but they did not remove him, so he's fighting back. And around the Roger Stone case, and around what Bill Barr is doing in terms of the investigations for criminal indictments of the people involved in the whole FISA warrant operation, we have the beginnings of a potential takedown of the enforcement arm of this empire internally in the United States. But other parts of the world have similar enforcement arms within their structure. This is in Brazil, where it was that enforcement arm which brought down Lula. It's similar in Argentina, in Europe, in Germany. They have the same thing in some form or another. But you have an enforcement arm in all these countries to keep the domestic political system in place. In Italy, they're going after, that enforcement arm is going after the leading pro-development head of the Lega Nord, Matteo Salvini. So you get the sense of how the internal process that exists goes on in these countries. But we have now reached something very profound, which is the breakdown crisis. The global financial system has been for a long time, especially since 2008, has been in a position of being of a systemic blowout, of too big to fail, too big to jail, and the whole thing's been on a central bank life support system. But something has come along which is now going to force things. And that something is the coronavirus. And I'll explain how that works. The coronavirus is being treated very seriously in China. The Chinese government has put the economics, maintaining the economy, behind saving the population. So they are doing this most incredible mobilization to slow down the disease, to increase the rate of cure, to everything possible. And they're approaching it from a very scientific and technological, and whatever they're learning from it, they're putting back into the fight. And they're calling it a people's war, meaning it's a people's war against this particular virus. I can't tell you where the virus is coming from. That's a whole nother issue. But nonetheless, this virus has created a situation in China where there is a temporary decline in the physical production, in the physical economy, in the trade. Now, the Western countries are, the Western European and US and North American nations are primarily consumer nations. They are not the production center of the world. China is a far greater production center. Other countries are as well. So this slowdown in the physical economy and future slowdowns that are expected, particularly in travel, particularly in transportation, particularly when nations start to close their borders, like between Italy and other nations, what tends to happen is you have a slowdown in the actual activity, and there's an effect on corporate stock values. There's an effect on all the values of everything, because you don't have enough economic activity going on to maintain the stock values or maintain the financial values, the financialization that goes on with all of that. And since you already have a very vulnerable financial system that is on Federal Reserve and other central bank life support, you are now beginning to see the potential of the blowout of that system occurring. But whether or not this virus was, wherever the origin of the virus was, the point is that China is really mobilizing, but can the U.S. do the kind of mobilizing that China is doing if the virus comes here? Can other countries? Can we keep the population focused on fighting it and not go into individual panic mode that will further disintegrate the economy? A further disintegration of the economy will also trigger a further disintegration of the financial system. So we're at a very particular turning moment where you're going to have to change the policies if you want to survive. You're going to have to create a mobilization of the resources of our nation. Other nations have to do the same, and to do that, you're going to have to break out of this financial system. You're going to have to break out of this financial system and establish a new agreement, credit systems, and so forth and so on. So we are at a forcing point, a breakdown point, and perhaps the greatest illustration of the breakdown point is in the presidential situation, the presidential race, and all eyes are on the remaining 7 Democratic candidates that were in a debate last night in South Carolina. Now, if you look at these people and what they were saying to each other, and accusing of being owned by the Russians or whatever the particular thing that were being said, you look at the crisis as it's coming down our way, the coronavirus, the financial crisis, the war situation that's developing around Turkey. Turkey is being encouraged by Pompeo, by the British, to go to war with Russia in Syria. In Syria, Israel is helping out the Turks. We had a potential new confrontation with a NATO country that could lead to world war. All of this is going on, and you look at these people, all of the candidates that are running, and collectively, when you think about that a major party is going to have one of these people as their candidate for president, and all of the hoopla and all of the spending and everything going on, you look at it and it's quite horrifying. It's quite horrifying. Even if Trump does a good job in this situation, it's still quite horrifying that this is what you've come to. And what makes these candidates uniform, they are completely uniform in the fundamental policy that they represent. And what is their policy? Shutting down industrial processes to cut back on carbon emissions. Taxing the hell out of the use of carbon and gas and natural gas, and gas in your car, and carbon. Well, we're going to need a massive economic mobilization to deal with the coronavirus, at least. And you guys want to shut down the physical economy and claim that the climate emergency is the priority issue. So you're gonna shut everything down, and that's the priority issue. And we all, and those of us who've investigated the whole issue, know that the people behind the climate emergency is the banking system, is the oligarchs. It's not, and that it's a population reduction policy. It's actually designed to just shut down the physical economy so that there's a collapse, and that collapse leads to a massive decline in population. So you have the virus, you have the bigger virus, the most dangerous virus of all is the green agenda. That is even far more threatening than the coronavirus, and that's what's coming out of all the Democratic Party candidates. And what are they prancing around and doing? They're all trying to convince the people with the billions of dollars who are going to be donating that money that they are the best qualified to carry out a policy of genocide against the world population and against the U.S. population. And that's occurring. That whole thing is occurring in the context of the coronavirus and the threat to the financial system and the threat of war. Okay, so this is really an amazing situation, and we have come to the breakdown crisis forecast by LaRouche beginning in 71. When in a debate with Alva Lerner, he laid out that the financial policies, the economic policies, would lead to this kind of trajectory, where you would essentially destroy nations, you would essentially destroy the potential future based on this kind of economics of neoliberalism, which rejects the idea of natural law, which rejects the idea of the general welfare, and sets up a, quote, rules-based order based on financial rules, financial powers. Now, Russia's not going along with that, or they have up to a certain point, but they're less and less so. China is breaking out of it. And the Belt and Road is a rejection, the development of the Belt and Road around the world is a rejection of all of this. So here we are in this incredible breakdown crisis, and the policies that LaRouche left us, the 4 laws, the bank separation, the credit system, a new global fixed exchange system between sovereign nations, and the building of infrastructure and the drive for scientific and technological fusion and going for the breakthrough scientific and trade, in space and fusion, those areas would catapult humanity to a platform of much greater sustainability. People talk about sustainability. No, only scientific and technological progress can create an increasing platform of productive power on which to sustain an increasing population. The only movement, the only group that's saying that the world's not overpopulated has been saying it for 45 years, is the movement associated with LaRouche. The only political figure that's emerged in a very powerful way to actually echo that is Donald Trump at Davos. He made that very clear, that he doesn't believe in the world being overpopulated. He believes that human beings can aspire to develop and solve problems. And for that reason, it's not overpopulating implicitly. So we're in a very incredible thing. Meanwhile, China's being massively demonized by these knee-jerk ideologues who are blaming China for everything, because China's taking off economically, and if you don't want to do the same, if you don't change to do the same, then you're faced with this disparity where you cannot be the power anymore economic. You cannot order every country in the world to do. You cannot threaten a war against every country in the world. You cannot threaten boycotts. You cannot threaten sanctions. You cannot threaten any of this stuff. You can't do that anymore. The world isn't yours anymore. It's not run by the British anymore. The British are losing. The whole British Empire, of which the U.S. is a principal component, is going. It's crashing. And these are the most incredible period that we're in, which is a transition period into this. So this coming Tuesday, March 3rd, we will have so-called Super Tuesday, and we will have a better defined situation in terms of whether Bernie Sanders will have most likely become the nominee, or whether he's going to be stopped and something else will happen at the convention. But that was the big issue maybe a week or two ago, but now things are moving much faster. So that prior to the election in November, we could have a severe coronavirus crisis in the United States where there has to be a massive mobilization. And these people, if they're playing the same games they play of posturing and subterfuge, they may just try to wreck any kind of cooperation with the president required to deal with this. That's the kind of resist movement that you're dealing with, from the British, through Obama, through the deep state, through all of the institutions. They will try to screw up any kind of mobilization that could be done to deal with the virus. On the other hand, those who want to survive, those who want to live, those who have to make a decision that whether or not they're going to screw up the president's mobilization future mobilization to deal with this, or whether they're going to work with the president, which means a dramatic change in the orientation of the United States internally as we go into the election. So the partisanship of the election and the resist movement against Trump, is intersecting the demands of a national economic mobilization, of a change in policy, and in that context, we could have the collapse of the banking system. We could have a collapse of the financial system, because these are interlocked and integrated. So then what is Trump going to do? And are these people going to resist the necessary measures to keep people alive? You got about 2 weeks after the payment system collapses, after you can't get your money out of the machines, when all your bank accounts are inactive. You have about 2 weeks to reorganize things at best. And if you don't, then you have total chaos. And a lot of people have been thinking about this for a long time. You got a lot of people stocking up on guns. Why do you think they have millions of people with millions of guns out there? Because they look at this reality and they say, well, we don't see a government that's there for us, and if this thing blows, they're not going to be able to do anything, so it's going to be every man for himself. Well, that's not a very good situation. That's not a very good mindset to be in. You don't want to have that happen. So the President of the United States and whoever is sane is going to have to be ready to mobilize to defend the nation from the financial collapse, from the coronavirus, etc. And if they can't do that, then we're not going to have a country. It's going to be destroyed, and so will the world. And that reality requires also that Trump be able to meet with Putin and with Xi Jinping and with Modi and with other governments to put together a plan for how you're going to deal with all of this, which includes a new financial architecture. So what was happening in the debates? Well, everybody was accusing everybody else of being a Russian agent. That doesn't help that situation. The fact that Bernie Sanders is being accused of being run by Putin, it doesn't help. The fact that this whole thing about Russia's intervening into the election, they're not intervening in the election. They never intervened in the first place. So this is all the kind of situation that we're coming into. It is a breakdown moment. And LaRouche's 4 laws are key. And what's key is the institution of the presidency. Is it going to be able to carry out a dramatic change in the crisis? I'm pretty certain Trump has some idea of how to do this, but will there be massive subterfuge from the entire establishment and from the entire, which will be a mass suicide of this country? That's the good question.
Common stock investments have helped to make our country prosperous and powerful. Owning a share in American industry is like owning a share in the future of our nation. But remember, John Q, there is a risk as well as an advantage in owning any kind of property. So get the facts before you put your money to work.